behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where every gesture carries the weight of centuries, and every piece of jewelry tells a story of power, a single brooch became the center of the most dramatic royal standoff in decades. The Queen's Jubilee Brooch, a magnificent piece adorned with diamonds that once caught the light in Queen Elizabeth's hair, was about to become the symbol of a battle that would define the future of the monarchy. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense attitude and unwavering loyalty to royal tradition, had made a decision that would send shockwaves through the palace corridors. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, stood at the center of a storm she never saw coming. And Queen Camilla, with her carefully laid plans for cementing her place in royal history, was about to discover that some traditions cannot be bought, borrowed, or claimed. What happened in the private chambers of Windsor Castle on that crisp autumn morning would change everything. The story of three women, one precious brooch, and a moment that revealed the true power dynamics within the House of Windsor is about to unfold. This is not just about jewelry or protocol. This is about respect, legacy, and the unspoken rules that govern one of the world's most watched families. The truth behind Princess Anne's shocking decision, Kate's graceful response, and Camilla's stunned silence reveals a side of royal life that the public never sees. Every smile, every curtsy, and every carefully chosen accessory in the royal world carries meaning far deeper than appearances suggest. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Princess Anne walked purposefully down the long corridor, her riding boots clicking against the polished marble floor. She had just returned from her daily horse ride, a routine that helped her think clearly about matters that required her careful attention. Today was different, though. Today, she carried with her a decision that had been weighing heavily on her mind for weeks. In her private study, Anne opened an ornate wooden box that had been sitting on her desk since the previous evening. Inside, nestled on midnight blue velvet, lay the Queen's Jubilee Brooch. The piece was breathtaking in its simplicity and elegance, a cluster of brilliant diamonds arranged in the shape of a flower, with sapphires forming delicate leaves that seemed to dance in the morning light. This was not just any piece of jewelry. This brooch had been specially commissioned for Queen Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee in 1977 and had become one of her most treasured accessories. Anne picked up the brooch carefully, feeling its weight in her palm. She remembered watching her mother pin this very piece to her coat on countless occasions: state visits, garden parties, Christmas broadcasts to the nation. The Queen had worn it with such pride, and it had become a symbol of her long and dedicated reign. Now, with the Queen gone, the question of who would inherit this precious piece had become a source of unexpected tension within the royal family. The previous week had been particularly difficult for Anne. She had discovered that Camilla had been making inquiries about several of the late Queen's personal jewelry pieces, including the Jubilee Brooch. Through her lady-in-waiting, Camilla had let it be known that she believed, as Queen Consort, she should have access to the most significant pieces from the royal collection. The suggestion had been presented diplomatically, but Anne saw through the careful wording immediately, and remembered the conversation she had overheard in the green drawing room just 3 days earlier. Camilla had been speaking with one of her closest advisors, discussing which pieces would be most appropriate for her upcoming state functions. The Jubilee Brooch had been mentioned specifically, with Camilla noting how it would complement her blue ensemble for the upcoming diplomatic reception. The casual way she had discussed it, as if the matter was already settled, had troubled Anne deeply. What bothered Princess Anne most was not just the presumption, but the complete lack of understanding about what the brooch represented. This was not merely a beautiful accessory. It was a link to her mother's legacy, a symbol of decades of service and dedication to the crown. The idea that it might be treated as just another pretty bauble to be worn at social events felt like a betrayal of everything her mother had stood for, and had spent her entire life watching her mother navigate the delicate balance between personal feelings and royal duty. She had learned that every decision, no matter how small it might seem to outsiders, carried weight and meaning within the monarchy. The choice of jewelry for a public appearance was never random. It always carried a message, whether about the importance of the occasion, respect for the host country, or connection to royal history. As she sat in her study that morning and thought about Kate Middleton and how gracefully the Princess of Wales had handled every challenge thrown her way since joining the royal family, Kate had never asked for special treatment or made demands about jewelry or privileges. Instead, she had quietly learned the protocols, respected the traditions, and earned the affection of both the public and the royal family through her dedication and genuine warmth. and remembered how Kate had looked at the Jubilee brooch during a private family gathering just after the Queen's funeral. There had been something in Kate's expression, not desire or envy, but deep respect and understanding of what the piece represented. Kate had actually stepped back when the jewelry collection was being discussed, clearly feeling that as a newer member of the family, she should not express any preferences about the distribution of such personal items. That moment had stayed with Anne. Here was a woman who understood the true meaning of royal service, who recognized that privilege came with responsibility, and who had never taken her position for granted. The contrast with Camilla's approach could not have been more stark. Where Kate showed humility and respect for tradition, Camilla seemed to view her new role as queen consort as an opportunity to claim the most prestigious symbols of monarchy for herself, and knew that her decision would create waves throughout the palace. The royal household operated on unspoken hierarchies and careful protocols that had been developed over centuries. By choosing to give the Jubilee brooch to Kate instead of allowing it to go to Camilla, and would be making a statement about what she believed the monarchy should represent going forward. The Princess Royal had always been known for her direct approach to problems. She did not believe in endless committee meetings or diplomatic dancing around difficult subjects. When she saw something that needed to be done, she acted. This situation was no different. The Jubilee brooch belonged with someone who would honor its significance, not someone who saw it merely as an accessory befitting her station, and stood up from her desk and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where her mother had spent so many peaceful hours. She could almost see the Queen there, tending to her beloved flowers or walking with her corgis. What would her mother have wanted? And felt certain she knew the answer. The Queen had always valued substance over show, dedication over entitlement, and genuine service over personal ambition. The decision was made, and would present the brooch to Kate personally, in a private ceremony that honored both the gift and the recipient. She would explain the significance of the piece and her reasons for choosing Kate as its new guardian. This was not about creating conflict with Camilla. It was about ensuring that this precious link to the Queen's legacy would be cherished and respected by someone who truly understood its meaning, and picked up her phone to call Kate's private secretary. The meeting would need to be arranged carefully, away from the usual palace protocols and formalities. This was a personal gift from one royal woman to another, based on respect, admiration, and a shared understanding of what it meant to serve the crown with dignity and grace. As she waited for the call to connect, and felt a sense of peace about her decision. Sometimes the most important choices were also the most difficult ones. But she knew that in giving the Jubilee brooch to Kate, she was honoring her mother's memory and ensuring that this symbol of royal dedication would continue to represent the very best of what the monarchy could be. The conversation with Kate's secretary was brief, but warm. A private meeting was arranged for the following afternoon in Anne's personal apartments. The Princess of Wales would be told only that Princess and wished to discuss a matter of family importance. The surprise and the significance of the moment would unfold naturally when they met face to face, and carefully placed the brooch back in its box and locked it in her private safe. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in the story of this remarkable piece of jewelry, and she was confident that she was making the right choice for both the brooch and the future of the royal family. Kate Middleton arrived at Princess Anne's private apartments at precisely 3 o'clock the following afternoon, punctual as always and carrying herself with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. She wore a simple navy dress with pearl earrings, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that showed respect for the formality of meeting with the Princess Royal. Despite having been part of the royal family for over a decade, Kate still felt a flutter of nervousness when summoned for private meetings with the senior royals. Princess Anne greeted Kate at the door personally, a gesture that immediately told Kate this was not a routine meeting about royal schedules or protocol adjustments. Anne's expression was serious but kind, and she guided Kate to the sitting room where afternoon tea had been prepared on her grandmother's china, another sign that this gathering held special significance. "Thank you for coming, Catherine," Anne said, using Kate's formal name in the way that the senior royals did during important conversations. "Please sit down. We have something rather important to discuss." Kate took her seat on the cream-colored sofa, accepting the cup of Earl Grey tea that Anne offered. The room around them spoke of decades of royal life, photographs of horses and sporting events, awards for charitable work, and subtle reminders of Anne's lifetime of service to the crown. This was not the formal grandeur of the staterooms, but rather the personal space of a woman who had dedicated her entire life to duty and tradition. I've asked you here today because I have a decision to share with you, and began, her voice carrying the weight of careful consideration. It concerns a piece of jewelry that belonged to my mother, the Queen's Jubilee Brooch. I'm sure you remember seeing it. Kate nodded, immediately picturing the exquisite piece she had admired from afar on so many occasions. Yes, of course. Her Majesty wore it beautifully. It was one of her favorites, wasn't it? And smiled for the first time since Kate had arrived. Indeed it was. She commissioned it herself for the Silver Jubilee, and it became quite special to her. The diamonds were selected personally, and she had very specific ideas about the design. It represented not just the celebration of 25 years on the throne, but her commitment to serve for as long as she was able. The Princess Royal stood and walked to an antique secretary desk in the corner of the room. From a locked drawer, she retrieved the familiar wooden jewelry box and returned to her seat across from Kate. I have been thinking very carefully about who should inherit this particular piece. It's not part of the official crown jewels, you understand. It was my mother's personal property, which means the decision about its future rests with the family. Kate felt her pulse quicken slightly. She had been part of enough royal conversations to understand that when Princess Anne spoke about family decisions regarding the Queen's personal effects, she was navigating delicate territory. Every choice would be scrutinized, analyzed, and discussed throughout the palace and beyond. And opened the box slowly, revealing the brooch in all its sparkling glory. Even in the soft afternoon light of the sitting room, the diamonds caught the light beautifully, creating tiny rainbows on the walls around them. Kate drew in a quiet breath. The piece was even more stunning up close than she had realized. "Catherine," and said, her voice taking on a tone of formality mixed with genuine warmth, "I would like you to have this brooch. Not as a loan from the royal collection, not as something to be worn occasionally at state functions, but as your own personal piece, to treasure and to wear as you see fit." The words hung in the air between them as Kate struggled to process what she had just heard. Her first instinct was to protest, to suggest that such a precious piece should remain with the senior members of the family or perhaps be preserved in a museum. But the expression on Anne's face told her that this decision had been made after careful thought and was not open for debate. "Your Royal Highness, I'm overwhelmed," Kate managed to say. "This is such an honor, but are you certain? Such a meaningful piece." And leaned forward, her expression intensifying. "Catherine, let me be perfectly clear about why I'm making this choice. Over the years since you joined our family, I have watched you serve with grace, dignity, and genuine commitment. You have never asked for special privileges or made demands about your position. You have earned the respect of the public and the family through your actions, not your expectations." Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she listened to Princess Anne's words. The Princess Royal was not known for flowery speeches or excessive emotional displays, which made her words even more meaningful. "My mother valued authenticity above all else," and continued. "She could spot someone who was playing a role versus someone who was genuinely committed to service. She spoke to me several times about how impressed she was with your dedication, particularly during those difficult years when you were adjusting to royal life under such intense public scrutiny." The memory of those early years brought a flood of emotions for Kate. The constant criticism in the media, the pressure to perform perfectly at every public engagement, the steep learning curve of royal protocol. It had all felt overwhelming at times. But the Queen had been a steady source of guidance and encouragement, offering advice with gentle humor and infinite patience. And stood and moved to sit beside Kate on the sofa, a gesture of intimacy that spoke volumes about the significance of this moment. "There is something else you should know, Catherine. There have been expectations expressed by other family members about this particular piece. Suggestions that it should go to someone based on their current position rather than their character or service." Kate understood immediately what Anne was referring to without needing explicit details. The politics of royal jewelry were complex, and she had observed enough family dynamics to recognize the careful balance between hierarchy, tradition, and personal relationships. "I want you to understand that my decision to give this to you is not meant as a slight to anyone else," and explained carefully. "Rather, it is a recognition of what you represent and how you conduct yourself as a member of this family. My mother believed that the monarchy's future depended on people who understood that privilege must be earned through service, not simply claimed through position." And picked up the brooch from its velvet nest and held it toward Kate. "This piece represents 50 years of my mother's reign, and her commitment to the people she served. I believe it belongs with someone who shares those values and will honor that legacy. Kate accepted the brooch with trembling hands, feeling the weight of both the jewelry and the responsibility it represented. The diamonds felt cool against her palm, but the gesture warmed her heart in a way that no material gift ever had before. This was about so much more than a piece of jewelry. It was about belonging, acceptance, and recognition of her place within the royal family. "Thank you," Kate whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, I will treasure this always, not just for its beauty but for what it represents and the confidence you're showing in me." And smiled, a rare display of genuine warmth from the usually reserved Princess Royal. "I know you will, my dear. And I know my mother would be pleased with this decision." The two women sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both understanding that something significant had just taken place. Kate carefully examined the brooch, noting the intricate craftsmanship and the way each diamond had been perfectly positioned to create maximum brilliance. She could almost feel the history contained within the piece. All the important moments where it had adorned the queen, all the photographs where it had caught the camera's flash, all the state occasions where it had represented the dignity of the crown. "There is one more thing I should mention," and said, her tone becoming slightly more serious. "I would ask that you keep this between us for now. The formal announcement of jewelry distributions from my mother's collection is still being finalized, and it would be best to let that process complete before revealing this particular arrangement." Kate nodded, understanding completely. Royal protocol required careful timing and consideration of all family members' feelings. The news of this gift would eventually become public, but it needed to happen in the right way and at the right time. As their meeting drew to a close, and walked Kate to the door, carrying herself with the satisfaction of someone who had made a difficult decision and felt confident about the outcome. Kate clutched the jewelry box carefully, still hardly believing that such a precious piece of royal history was now in her care. "Wear it well, Catherine," and said as they parted. "And remember that you have earned this through your own merit, not through anyone else's favor or position." Kate returned to Kensington Palace that afternoon with her heart full and her mind racing. She knew that this gift would eventually create ripples throughout the royal family and beyond, but for now, she simply wanted to share this moment with William and appreciate the incredible honor that Princess Anne had bestowed upon her. Prince William was in his study at Kensington Palace when Kate arrived home that afternoon, still clutching the jewelry box that contained the Queen's Jubilee brooch. He looked up from the correspondence he was reviewing and immediately noticed the unusual combination of excitement and bewilderment in his wife's expression. After 13 years together, he had learned to read Kate's moods with remarkable accuracy, and something significant had clearly occurred during her meeting with his aunt. "How did it go with Aunt Anne?" William asked, setting aside his papers and giving Kate his full attention. He had been curious about the mysterious summons, as Princess Anne was not typically given to impromptu social calls or casual family gatherings. Kate sat down in the chair across from his desk, still holding the box carefully in her lap. "William, you're not going to believe what just happened." Her voice carried a mixture of wonder and uncertainty that immediately captured his interest. She opened the jewelry box slowly, revealing the magnificent brooch that both of them remembered seeing countless times adorning his grandmother's clothing. William's expression shifted immediately from casual interest to complete surprise, and then to something approaching awe as he realized what Kate was showing him. "Is that?" he began, then stopped himself as the implications of what he was seeing began to sink in. "Did Aunt Anne give you Granny's Jubilee brooch?" Kate nodded, her eyes still wide with the shock of the afternoon's events. She said she wanted it to go to someone who would honor its significance and who had earned their place in the family through service rather than entitlement. "I'm still processing everything she said, but, William, I think there's more to this story than she shared with me directly." William stood up and came around the desk to examine the brooch more closely. He had always been fascinated by his grandmother's jewelry, not for its monetary value, but for the stories each piece told about royal history and tradition. This particular brooch held special significance because it represented his grandmother's personal taste and her pride in reaching the silver jubilee milestone. "Tell me exactly what Aunt Anne said," William requested, settling into the chair beside Kate's. He knew his aunt well enough to understand that such a gesture would never be made lightly or without careful consideration of all the possible consequences. Kate recounted the conversation in detail, Describing Princess Anne's careful words about earning respect through service, her references to other family members having expectations about the piece, and her clear intention that the brooch should go to someone who truly understood its symbolic importance. As Kate spoke, William's expression grew more thoughtful. He was well aware of the delicate dynamics surrounding his grandmother's personal effects and the various claims that different family members might feel entitled to make. The distribution of such items was always politically charged, with each piece carrying implications about status, favoritism, and future roles within the royal family. And mentioned that other family members had expressed expectations about this piece? William asked, wanting to understand the full context of his aunt's decision. Kate nodded carefully. She was diplomatic about it, but she made it clear that someone else had assumed they would receive it based on their current position rather than their service or character. I got the impression that Aunt Anne disagreed strongly with that assumption. William was quiet for a moment, processing this information. He knew without Kate needing to spell it out explicitly that his stepmother had likely made inquiries about several significant pieces from his grandmother's collection. Camilla's approach to her new role as queen consort had sometimes involved assumptions about privileges and possessions that didn't always align with royal tradition or family sentiment. You know, William said slowly, I think Aunt Anne made exactly the right choice. This brooch represents everything that Granny valued most: dedication, consistency, and genuine service to others. You embody those qualities in a way that would have made her very proud. Kate felt tears forming in her eyes again as she listened to her husband's words. The validation from both Princess and William meant more to her than any material gift ever could. She had spent years feeling like she was still proving herself worthy of her place in the royal family, despite the public's apparent acceptance and affection. But, William, Kate said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, we both know this is going to create problems. When word gets out about this, and it will get out eventually, there are going to be people who feel that the brooch should have gone elsewhere based on the traditional hierarchy. William nodded, recognizing the truth in Kate's observation. Royal protocol dictated certain orders of precedence that could make his aunt's decision appear controversial to those who didn't understand the deeper considerations involved. Are you worried about the potential reaction? Kate thought for a moment before answering. I'm not worried about criticism from outside the family. I've learned to handle that over the years. But I am concerned about creating tension within the family itself. The last thing I want is for this generous gift to become a source of conflict or resentment. This was exactly the kind of thoughtful consideration that William loved most about his wife. Even when receiving an incredible honor, Kate's first instinct was to think about how her actions might affect others, and whether she might inadvertently cause problems for the people she cared about. Catherine, William said, using her formal name in the way he did when he wanted her to pay particular attention to his words, you didn't ask for this gift, and you certainly didn't scheme or manipulate to receive it. Aunt Anne made this choice based on her own judgment and her assessment of character. You have every right to accept it gracefully and to wear the brooch with pride. William reached over and took the brooch from the box, holding it up to the light streaming through the study windows. The diamonds sparkled brilliantly, just as they had when his grandmother wore the piece to countless state functions and public appearances. Do you know what I think Granny would say about all this? Kate shook her head, interested to hear William's perspective on how the late Queen might have viewed the situation. I think she would say that titles and positions are given, but respect is earned, William continued. She spent 70 years proving that point through her own actions. The fact that Aunt Anne chose to give this to you based on your service rather than your rank in the family hierarchy would have pleased Granny enormously. William stood up and moved behind Kate's chair, gently placing the brooch against her navy dress to see how it would look when worn. Perfect, he said with satisfaction. It suits you beautifully, and, more importantly, you suit it. Kate looked at herself in the mirror across the room, seeing not just how the jewelry complemented her appearance, but imagining the weight of history and responsibility that would come with wearing it. This was not just an accessory. It was a symbol of royal service and a connection to the woman who had guided the monarchy through decades of change and challenge. When do you think we should tell your father about this? Kate asked, bringing up the practical considerations that would need to be addressed sooner rather than later. William considered the question carefully. His father's reaction would be crucial to how smoothly this situation could be managed. King Charles had always respected his sister's judgment, but he would also need to consider the broader implications for family harmony and royal protocol. I think we should arrange to speak with him privately within the next few days, William suggested. It would be better for him to hear about this directly from us rather than through palace gossip or formal announcements. We can explain Aunt Anne's reasoning and emphasize that this was her independent decision. Kate nodded, appreciating William's strategic thinking about family politics. They both understood that handling this situation properly would require careful communication and sensitivity to everyone's feelings and positions. There's something else we should consider, Kate said thoughtfully. If we're going to face any criticism or controversy over this, I want to make sure that we're prepared to explain not just what happened, but why it matters. This isn't about me receiving expensive jewelry. It's about what this piece represents and the values it embodies. William smiled at his wife's instinct to frame the situation in terms of larger principles rather than personal benefit. This was exactly the kind of perspective that had likely influenced his aunt's decision in the first place. Kate understood intuitively that royal life was about service and symbolism, not just privilege and possessions. You're absolutely right, William agreed. And I think the best way to honor both the gift and the giver is to wear the brooch publicly with confidence, and to let our actions continue to demonstrate why Aunt Anne felt you were the right person to receive it. As the afternoon light began to fade outside their windows, Kate carefully placed the brooch back in its box, but not before taking one more moment to admire its beauty and contemplate the incredible journey that had brought such a meaningful piece of royal history into her care. "Thank you," she said to William, "for helping me understand how to think about all of this. I want to make sure I handle this in a way that honors your grandmother's memory and your aunt's confidence in me." William kissed the top of her head gently. "Just be yourself, Catherine. That's what got you this gift in the first place, and it's what will guide you in deciding how to treasure it properly." 3 days after Kate's meeting with Princess Anne, word of the brooch transfer began to circulate through the carefully maintained networks of palace staff, royal correspondents, and family insiders who monitored every development within the House of Windsor. The news reached Queen Camilla through her private secretary during her morning routine at Clarence House, delivered as part of the daily briefing that kept her informed about family matters and potential media stories. Camilla was seated at her dressing table, having her hair styled for a charity luncheon, when her private secretary, Margaret Whitfield, approached with the morning's intelligence reports. These briefings had become routine since Camilla's elevation to Queen Consort, covering everything from upcoming engagements to family developments that might require her attention or response. "Your Majesty," Margaret began carefully, "there's something we need to discuss regarding the distribution of items from Queen Elizabeth's personal collection. It appears that Princess Anne has made a decision about the Jubilee brooch that we were not previously informed about." Camilla's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup as she processed these words. She had been expecting to hear about formal arrangements for several pieces from the late Queen's collection, particularly those that would be appropriate for her to wear as Queen Consort at upcoming state functions. The Jubilee brooch had been specifically mentioned in conversations with her advisors as a piece that would complement her formal wardrobe beautifully. "What kind of decision?" Camilla asked, her voice maintaining the carefully controlled tone she had learned to use when discussing potentially sensitive topics. Margaret consulted her notes, clearly uncomfortable with having to deliver news that she knew would be poorly received. "According to our sources within Princess Anne's household, she has gifted the brooch personally to the Princess of Wales. The transfer appears to have taken place in a private ceremony earlier this week." The room fell silent except for the soft sound of the hair stylist continuing her work, seemingly oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the air. Camilla stared at her reflection in the mirror, processing not just the information she had received, but the implications of how and why such a decision might have been made without any consultation or advance notice. "Did Princess Anne provide any explanation for this choice?" Camilla inquired, her voice betraying the first hint of strain as she struggled to maintain her composure. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "The information we have suggests that Princess Anne based her decision on her assessment of who would best honor the piece's significance and historical importance. She apparently emphasized service and character over traditional considerations of rank or position." The carefully diplomatic language could not disguise the clear message being conveyed. Camilla understood immediately that Princess Anne had deliberately chosen to bypass the conventional expectations about who would inherit such a prestigious piece from the Queen's collection. More significantly, the decision seemed designed to send a message about what qualities Princess Anne valued most in determining who deserved such an honor. Camilla dismissed her stylist and asked Margaret to give her some private time to process this development. As the door closed behind them, she sat alone in her dressing room, staring at her reflection and trying to understand how such a significant decision had been made without any input from her or her office. The Jubilee brooch had been more than just another piece of jewelry to Camilla. She had seen it as a symbol of her new position and a tangible connection to the royal legacy she was now part of as queen consort. More practically, she had already planned several upcoming appearances where the brooch would have been the perfect complement to her formal attire, particularly the state banquet for the visiting Italian president that was scheduled for the following month. What troubled Camilla most was not just the loss of the brooch itself, but what the decision revealed about her standing within the royal family. Despite her official position as queen consort, it appeared that Princess Anne felt comfortable making unilateral decisions about significant family heirlooms without consulting her or considering her potential interest in the pieces. Camilla thought back to her conversations with her advisors about establishing her collection of royal jewelry. As the wife of the king, she had assumed that she would naturally inherit many of the queen's most important personal pieces, following the tradition of previous queen consorts who had worn the jewelry of their predecessors. The idea that individual family members might choose to distribute items based on personal preferences rather than official protocol had not occurred to her. The more Camilla considered the situation, the more frustrated she became. She had spent decades working to establish her place within the royal family, weathering criticism and controversy to eventually gain acceptance and respect. Her marriage to Charles had been followed by years of careful rehabilitation of her public image, and her elevation to queen consort had seemed like the culmination of that long journey toward full acceptance. Now, with this single decision, Princess Anne had essentially communicated that official titles and positions were less important than other, more subjective criteria. The message was clear. Despite her status as queen consort, Camilla had not earned the same level of respect or confidence that Kate had apparently achieved through her years of service to the royal family. Camilla reached for her phone to call her closest advisor and friend, Fiona Lansdowne, who had been instrumental in helping her navigate royal protocol and family politics over the years. Fiona answered immediately, clearly having anticipated that this call might be coming. "I assume you've heard about the brooch situation," Camilla said without preamble. "Yes, I have," Fiona replied carefully. "Margaret called me shortly after she spoke with you. I've been trying to gather more information about how this decision was made and whether there might be any opportunity to address the situation diplomatically." Camilla appreciated Fiona's immediate understanding of both the practical and symbolic implications of what had occurred. "What are our options? Can this decision be challenged or reconsidered?" Fiona was quiet for a moment before responding. Technically, the Queen's personal jewelry was not part of the crown jewels, which means it was essentially private property that could be distributed according to family wishes rather than formal protocol. Princess Anne, as one of the senior family members, would have had the authority to make decisions about specific pieces. This explanation did nothing to improve Camilla's mood. The legal technicalities were less important to her than the clear message that had been sent about her place within the family hierarchy. But surely there should have been some consultation about pieces of such significance. In an ideal world, yes, Fiona agreed. But it appears that Princess Anne chose to act independently, possibly because she felt strongly about who should receive this particular piece. From what I understand, her decision was based on her personal assessment of who would best represent the values that the brooch symbolized. Camilla stood up from her dressing table and walked to the window, looking out at the London street below, where photographers often gathered in hopes of catching glimpses of royal family members. "So what you're telling me is that I should simply accept that a piece I had every reason to expect to receive has been given away based on someone else's subjective judgment about my worthiness?" Fiona's voice remained calm and diplomatic. "What I'm suggesting is that we need to think carefully about how to respond to this situation in a way that protects your dignity and your position while avoiding any appearance of petty jealousy or entitlement." The word entitlement hung in the air between them. Camilla knew that this was exactly the accusation that would be leveled against her if she chose to make an issue of Princess Anne's decision. Any complaint or objection would be framed as the new queen consort demanding jewelry and privileges rather than earning them through service and character. "What does Charles know about this?" Camilla asked, realizing that her husband's reaction and support would be crucial in determining how to handle the situation. "I believe Princess Anne plans to inform the king directly, probably within the next day or two," Fiona replied. It would be wise for you to discuss your feelings about this with him privately before he makes any official statements or responses. Camilla knew that Fiona was right about the importance of managing this situation carefully, but she also felt the sting of humiliation that would be difficult to overcome. The public would eventually learn about the brooch gift, and the story would inevitably be framed as Princess and choosing Kate over Camilla based on merit and service. The comparison would be both obvious and unflattering to the queen consort. "I need some time to think about how to handle this," Camilla said finally. "Can you make sure that our office doesn't make any statements or comments about the brooch situation until we've had a chance to develop a proper strategy?" Of course, Fiona agreed. "And, Camilla, for what it's worth, I think the most dignified response will be to publicly express happiness for Kate, while privately working to ensure that future decisions about family heirlooms involve proper consultation with all senior family members." After ending the call, Camilla remained at her window for several minutes, processing both her disappointment about the brooch and her frustration about being excluded from the decision-making process. She had worked so hard to establish her position within the royal family, only to discover that her official title as queen consort did not guarantee the same level of respect or consideration that other family members apparently enjoyed automatically. The afternoon's charity luncheon would require her to smile and perform her royal duties while internally dealing with this personal and political setback. But Camilla had learned over the years how to compartmentalize her private feelings when public appearances demanded her full attention and gracious demeanor. The show, as always, would go on. The formal family meeting took place 5 days later in the Oak Room at Windsor Castle, a private space that King Charles preferred for sensitive family discussions. The room's rich wood paneling and comfortable furniture created an atmosphere of intimacy that helped facilitate honest conversations among family members, away from the formalities of official palace protocols. King Charles had requested the meeting after receiving separate conversations from both Princess and Queen Camilla about the situation involving the Jubilee Brooch. As the head of the family, he needed to address the underlying tensions that had emerged and establish clear guidelines for handling similar situations in the future. Princess Anne arrived first, carrying herself with the quiet confidence that came from knowing she had acted according to her principles and her understanding of what was best for the family. She had spent the previous few days fielding inquiries from various palace officials and family members about her decision, but she remained convinced that she had made the right choice for the right reasons. William and Kate arrived together, with Kate wearing a simple black dress and her grandmother-in-law's pearl necklace, a deliberate choice to honor the Queen's memory while avoiding any display of the controversial brooch. Kate had spent considerable time preparing for this meeting, knowing that her words and demeanor would be crucial in determining how the situation would be resolved. Queen Camilla was the last to join the gathering, having taken extra time with her preparation to ensure that she presented herself with dignity and composure despite her private frustrations about the brooch decision. She wore a navy blue dress with her own jewelry, making no obvious reference to the missing piece that had sparked this family conference. King Charles began the meeting by acknowledging the delicate nature of the situation they were gathered to discuss. "We're here today because a decision was made about Mother's jewelry that has created some uncertainty about how such matters should be handled going forward. I want us to talk through this openly so that everyone understands the various perspectives and we can establish clearer guidelines for the future." Princess Anne spoke first, her voice clear and steady as she explained her reasoning for giving the Jubilee brooch to Kate. "I made this decision based on my assessment of who would best honor the significance of the piece and what it represented to our mother. The brooch symbolized her commitment to service and her pride in reaching the silver Jubilee milestone. I felt it belonged with someone who embodied those same values of dedication and humility." And paused before continuing, her gaze moving around the room to make eye contact with each family member. "I also want to be clear that this decision was not intended as a slight to anyone else. It was simply my judgment about where this particular piece would be most appropriately placed based on its historical significance and symbolic meaning." Camilla listened to Anne's explanation with carefully maintained composure, though those who knew her well could detect the slight tension in her jaw that indicated her continued displeasure with both the decision and the way it had been handled. When Charles invited her to share her perspective, she chose her words very carefully. "I appreciate Anne's explanation of her reasoning," Camilla began, her voice diplomatically neutral. "My concern has never been about the specific piece of jewelry, but rather about the process by which such decisions are made. As queen consort, I had naturally assumed that there would be consultation about significant items from the queen's personal collection, particularly pieces that might be appropriate for state functions and official engagements. Camilla's statement was perfectly crafted to express her disappointment without appearing petty or demanding. She had successfully framed her objection in terms of protocol and communication rather than personal entitlement, which was exactly the approach her advisors had recommended. Kate had been dreading this moment, knowing that anything she said might either inflame the situation or create the impression that she had somehow lobbied for the brooch behind the scenes. When Charles invited her to speak, she took a deep breath and chose to focus on gratitude and responsibility rather than defending her right to receive the gift. "I want to say how deeply honored I am by Princess Anne's confidence in me," Kate began. "This brooch represents so much more than jewelry to me. It's a connection to the Queen's legacy and a reminder of the values she embodied throughout her reign. I promise that I will wear it with the respect and dignity it deserves, and I hope that my actions will continue to justify the trust that Princess Anne has placed in me." Kate paused, then addressed the broader issue that everyone in the room was grappling with. "I also want to acknowledge that this situation has created some unexpected tensions, which was never my intention. If there's a way to resolve this that would be better for family harmony while still honoring Princess Anne's generous gift, I'm certainly open to discussing alternatives." This offer surprised everyone in the room, including William, who had not expected Kate to suggest potentially giving up the brooch. It demonstrated exactly the kind of thoughtfulness and consideration for others that had influenced Anne's original decision, while also showing Kate's genuine concern for family relationships over personal possession. King Charles recognized the wisdom and grace in Kate's response. "Catherine, your willingness to consider the broader family implications shows exactly the kind of character that I believe influenced Anne's decision in the first place. However, I don't think the solution here is to reverse a decision that was made for valid reasons based on thoughtful consideration." Charles turned his attention to the larger issue that needed to be addressed. "What we need to establish are clearer guidelines for how these decisions will be made in the future. My mother's personal jewelry collection contains many pieces with significant historical and sentimental value, and the distribution of these items needs to be handled in a way that considers both family hierarchy and individual merit." And leaned forward slightly, ready to defend her decision-making process. "Charles, I want to emphasize that I didn't make this choice lightly or arbitrarily. I spent considerable time thinking about what Mother would have wanted and who would best represent the values she held dear. The Jubilee brooch wasn't just another pretty bauble. It was a symbol of her commitment to service and duty." "I understand that, and I respect your reasoning," Charles replied. "But, going forward, I think it would be beneficial for decisions about significant pieces to involve discussion among the senior family members, even if the final choice remains with the person who has been designated to handle the distribution." This suggestion represented a compromise that acknowledged both Anne's authority to make such decisions and Camilla's legitimate expectation to be consulted about items that might affect her role as queen consort. It also established a framework for preventing similar misunderstandings in the future. William had remained largely silent during the discussion, but now he felt compelled to address the underlying dynamics that had contributed to the situation. "I think we also need to acknowledge that this controversy has highlighted some important questions about how we define worthiness and merit within our family. Anne's decision was based on character and service rather than official rank, which reflects values that I believe are important for the monarchy's future." His statement was diplomatically phrased but clearly supportive of both his aunt's reasoning and his wife's worthiness to receive such an honor. It also subtly reinforced the message that privilege within the royal family should be earned through action rather than simply claimed through position. Camilla recognized that the tide of the conversation was not moving in her favor, but she also understood that continuing to press her objections would only make her appear petty and entitled. Instead, she chose to gracefully accept the situation while establishing her expectation for better communication in the future. "I appreciate everyone's perspectives on this matter," Camilla said with as much dignity as she could muster. "While I'm disappointed about the lack of consultation, I can accept Anne's reasoning for her decision. I simply hope that future distributions will involve more discussion among family members so that everyone's interests and feelings can be taken into account." Charles nodded approvingly at his wife's response, recognizing that she had chosen the path of gracious acceptance over continued conflict. "I think that's exactly the right approach, Camilla. And I want to assure you that as we work through the remaining items in Mother's collection, your input and preferences will definitely be part of the conversation. The meeting concluded with an agreement that Princess Anne would consult with Charles and other senior family members about future jewelry distributions, while her decision about the Jubilee brooch would stand as made. Kate would wear the piece with pride and responsibility, understanding that it represented not just royal history, but also the confidence that Princess Anne had placed in her character and service. As the family members prepared to leave Windsor Castle, there was a sense that an important conversation had taken place and that clearer guidelines had been established for handling similar situations in the future. The Jubilee brooch would remain with Kate, but the process for making such decisions had been refined to prevent future misunderstandings and ensure that all family members felt heard and respected. Princess Anne felt satisfied that her decision had been vindicated and that the family had ultimately supported her reasoning, even if they had requested more consultation for future situations. Kate felt grateful for the continued support of her husband and father-in-law, while also being more aware than ever of the delicate balance required to maintain harmony within the royal family. And Queen Camilla, though disappointed about the brooch itself, had successfully established her expectation for inclusion in future decisions about royal heirlooms, ensuring that her position as queen consort would be properly respected in all such matters going forward. The incident had been resolved, but its implications for family dynamics and decision-making processes would influence royal protocol for years to come.